So today, this class is going to cover administration from the cabinets and the document types. So as we look at this screen, what we're seeing here is the file room. Once I log into the file room, if I don't have any cabinets yet, I wouldn't have anything to look at. So we're going to go ahead and build a cabinet. And what a cabinet build does is it enables me to put folders with the subdividers and the documents within. So, excuse me, the cabinet, such as employees, folders, and what we create the cabinet will define what I'll refer to as folder detail. So it's kind of like folder metadata, which will enable me to also locate the proper folder by any of those particular fields. So let's start out by building a cabinet type. What I'm going to do here first is I'm going to go under administration, and I want to mention to you that you do have what we refer to under setup as setup. What this can do for you, if you would like, is you can have it build cabinets for you. For example, if I wanted a cabinet type, say vendors, I'll pick vendors down here. And I could select the group, but we'll stay away from that for security. That would be because I can go to the cabinet afterwards and change it or update it. So I'm just going to go ahead and say add. I can do the same thing for types of documents. I'm not going to talk about document types yet, as I still want to stay focused on the cabinet type. So what I'm going to do now is go menu, administration or admin, back to setup, and this time I'm going to go to cabinet type, where I could either build cabinets, or because I just created one, let's see what it created for me. As you'll notice, there is now one called vendors. I'm going to click and then edit. I could have also double clicked here, but I'll click edit. These are the fields that the system had in its template for what I wanted. Now, let's say I don't need, for example, date started. So I'm going to get rid of that field. Oh, I already put some documents in this earlier. I apologize. So let's say that I was in a new structure though. Let's create one, because I wanted to do that anyway. And by the way, even once this existed, I could always add new fields and so forth, but let's build one from scratch right now. I didn't give that a field name, so I'm going to cancel out. So let's build one from scratch. Let's call this particular one that I'm building, we'll call this one, let's see, we've got employees. We'll just call it clients. So I'm going to create a cabinet called clients. I can put in a description and some notes if I wanted to. By the way, once you have a cabinet, you can hit the File Cabinet button, and it will make a copy of that cabinet. Now, not the folders within, but all of the infrastructure, which means all the definitions for the cabinet, meaning the fields and the subdividers and the security. But right now I've typed in, and I'll just say this is for our clients. And if I had any notes, I can't think of anything. So I'm going to go here. Now, let's create the first field. I'm going to put client. And by the way, what is so important about the order that I am putting these in right now? In other words, when I create these, this will be the first field, whatever the next field is, and depending on how many fields I create, I could create as many fields as I want. There are 3 ways for you to create the folders within the system. 3 ways. Number 1, say for example, a user is in the system, and I'm going to right mouse click here just to save this screen, because I do want to finish this obviously up. So I'm just going to jump over and opened up a new tab here, and let's say I was in, and I don't know what we do have, so that's why I couldn't delete it, because I didn't realize we already had the vendors. But in any case, let's say that I pick on one of these for whatever documents they might have. Looking for one that does have documents, so I'll switch over. Okay, So there's a document right there, for example. So one of the things that you will notice is that this document is also in a subdivider. But notice these fields here: project, project department, project start, project cost. That's because those were the fields, or the metadata fields, that they want to be able to look people up by, or in this case, projects. If they had employees, which we don't have any in this database, but let's say vendors, notice I could look them up by any of these particular fields. So if I said anything that has, I'll just put NAP, so it will capture anything that has Naperville as an example, where you can then open the documents if there are any, clicking on those. Now, when I'm building this cabinet here, I wanted you to notice that I will have the ability, and I must create one field, and only one field, it might not be this one, that will do two things. Now, just to finish where I was a moment ago, though, I was talking about 3 ways to get folders into the system. The very first way to get folders into the system is, for example, to add a document. Let's say that I'll use a simpler way. I'm going to go into the system and I want to add a vendor, for example. So when I go into the screen here, waiting for it to come up, I'm going to pick the cabinet though. So let's say that this was an employee or a vendor. We'll stay with vendor. Okay, so I select the cabinet vendor. Now, this is what's critical when you are building a cabinet. First of all, you can put any fields, and I'm going to click on vendor here, or I will click on vendor just to kind of compare for the moment. We'll come back and build our own. So what you'll notice here is that one of the fields has a check mark by it. You might have other fields that are required, and if you make those required, then the user will see an asterisk by it. But here's the most important thing. If, for example, when you're building this cabinet, you will have one field that will be a folder field. It does multiple functions, and one of them is, if you're using ARI with the name, it will come in and look for that name, whichever field you have. So again, ARI will be discussed in the ARI class, but if your folder field, and again, if I went to save it with 2 checked, it would tell me no. If I have vendor ID, and let's say we have folder 127835 is our vendor number. If I have a document that comes in through ARI named, it will file it based if that file name was that exact folder. Or if I put it to vendor name and it was Acme Company, if I have a file called Acme Company. So for example, if I have a file that says acmecompany.pdf, it would file into that particular cabinet if you've set up a rule for that. Again, that's ARI. So we'll stick with what we're talking about here. So first of all, to select vendor name as my folder field. What else does it do to have that folder field checked? Well, take another example. If you go through the system and you are actually, let me go to a different screen since I haven't finished this. If you were to go to a screen such as basically the Explorer type screen, you will notice, since I have vendor name as the folder field, that if you click on vendors, it displays the vendor name. If I were to, in the system, change it to vendor ID, then this screen would be showing me the vendor ID. Now remember, when a user's in the system, they can always hit the magnifying glass to see the other vendor information. But if they're on the previous screen where they could look it up, remember, all of the folder fields display. Now to finish the conversation about this field right here, and another thing you might want to do is make sure that, these are unique, maybe both of these fields. Because if a user goes into the system and doesn't bother to look to see if there already is that vendor, where they can do a search here on any part of it, so I could put in anything that has COM in it even, and selectively choose the proper vendor. Or if this vendor was brand new, I could just click on the vendor name and start typing. So if I put in the vendor name of the new vendor here, I can then go ahead and let it create the vendor. A second way I could add or create new vendors is, this isn't necessarily an administrative function, but it is in the concept that you might have a user that can only see this option based on the security that you set. If you allow them to add cabinets, add folders to a cabinet, say that they had vendors, and they look and they see that they don't have one, they could add a folder right here as well. So they could just put in a vendor, save, create a new vendor, and continue to create those vendors. So that's a second way you can do it. Actually, there are 4 ways. One will be discussed in ARI, but the third way I was talking about is, it is very important now that I'm talking about it to understand the layout you have here. And here's the reason why. You can actually take an Excel file, CSV file, for those of you know those type of files, they're common files. And let's say that you had a whole spreadsheet basically worth of all of your vendors. So you want to make sure the columns line up, meaning that this is column A, column B, column C, and so forth. Also, you have a folder that'll be discussed in ARI where you could just drag that CSV into a folder where it will actually create your vendors, in this case, for me. It will update vendors for me. But I also want to make sure of something. If I'm going to ever go back and load them again or update them, you'll want to make sure that you check unique, because otherwise, if you come in with the same file or a file with the same information, you want to make sure that it knows it matches it. Otherwise, and this is very important, it'll create them again. In other words, if you don't have unique, it'll just go ahead and keep adding new files or folders, if you use that approach. So keep that in mind, remember it. That's what's important. Now, in here you also have, and let's go ahead and create our own now. Let's say we have that clients. And in here, we'll just skip over these. And we're going to say the first field will be our client ID. I might not make that the display field, but I'm going to make it required because we really want that. And now you have up to 99 characters of space for each field. So client ID maybe we have is up to 10. And this field is not used right now. This will be used in the CRM that's coming. Unique. Am I going to make it so that that's the only that if somebody puts in the same client ID trying to create a new folder, it'll say no, that one exists. Now you have field types. The field types are numeric, meaning that the user will only be able to type in numbers. Date type, so that they'll put in a date or it'll pop up the calendar for them automatically. Text means pretty much freeform, type fields, obviously. And then you have checkbox or a drop-down. You can make your own drop-downs as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and make this a text field. Now the mask I will show in just a few moments, but for right now we'll skip over that. But right here, a tooltip. If you want to, this will show kind of the bubble over that field when a user hovers over it. It's kind of like a help. So if I just say, enter the 10-digit ID or something, again, don't need to do it. All it's doing is giving a display. Now I want to add another field. So I click on this. And let's say that this time I want to click the client start date, because I just want to get a couple of fields in there. Okay, I'm not going to put in a size even though I need to. I'm not going to, just to show an error message. Obviously, I don't want to make that unique, or I could only have one client start on any certain date. Also, this case, I'm going to make it a date type. Now, if I go on to another field here, I have to enter the size first. So I'm also going to have to put in the mask, but I'm going to do this. So I'm going to give about 15 characters of space because I'm not sure the format I want to actually have for this. So now I'm going to add a new field, but I have to enter the mask, meaning what do you want the date to look like? To enter the mask, there's this little blue with a couple white dots there. If you click on that box, then the masks pop up. Oops, sorry, there it is. Now, what do I want to have the date be looked like or stored or displayed as? So I'm just going to take, in this case, month / day / year, 4-digit year. So I say OK to that, and you see the mask there. I want to create another field. Let's just put another one active. Like, is the client still active, for example? Now watch what happens when I pick a checkbox. When I pick a checkbox, it grays out the size of the mask because it's just going to be a checkbox. There's not much more that there is to say. It knows how big it's going to be, and so forth. I'm going to add another field, and we'll put region. And what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to make this, and when I pick, as you'll notice, a drop down, once again, this grays out. But now, if I tried to go on, I would get a message saying I have to create a mask because let's go ahead, and now that it knows it's a drop down, when I click on the mask button here, it pops up the ones that I already have, but I'm going to create a new one. Now, what I'm about to create is one called region. It does not have to be the same name, but obviously for my purposes, it kind of makes sense. So remember, it does not have to match this name. I could use ones that I have already created, but in this case, I'm going to create a region, and I'm just going to start adding a couple, and I'm just going to say north and add that, and south, and I'll just say other. Okay. So I'm going to save those. Okay, and there's region now. Now, since I had to create it and save it first, if it already existed, all I would have done was I would have clicked on it. Oops, I don't want that one, I want that one. And then say OK. And you'll notice that the mask name drops right here. OK. Now, there are some other fields like numeric where you can define it. You can even define the currency type and things in the numeric. But what I want to focus my attention on right now is over here. Not this column, I'll explain that a little bit later, but this column right here. This column right here is to add the subdividers that I want to have available to me when I put documents in for a client. Don't have to have them, I have to have at least one, I could call it all, but for clients, I'm going to have in here, let's say I'm going to call this billing. Now, see this default folder? This means that when you go to put in a document, do you want it to be this subdivider as a default? In other words, you could have it pick for you. It saves you a keystroke. So maybe that's what I want. I'll just say add. I want another one for maybe for miscellaneous things that go on. Maybe I want another one for some correspondence. I'll just abbreviate that. And billing quarter, maybe contracts and agreements. Oops. And agreements. Okay. Maybe that's all I want. So what I'm going to do now is close this, and you'll notice that these subdividers are here. These. Let's say I have 1,000 client folders. And I have these options for subdividers. But for one of the clients, I have a unique one. The reason it shows edit and delete is because you can't add these variable client subfolders. Here, what you could do is see the ones that have been created. When a user is on the screen, you will see there is a way for a user that if these aren't the subdividers they want for that particular client, or they want these but they need an extra one, or two, or whatever, they can create those on the fly. Okay, down here I selectively choose the security. This is all covered in the security class, so we won't go into that, but we'll just leave it as is for now. And I'm all done. So if I save and exit, must select, oh, I forgot to select the folder field. And I want it to be, you know what, I forgot client name in here, so I'm just going to put client name, although it's kind of silly to put it down here. Client name, and I'm going to make that the folder field, so that's what I see it by, and we're going to require that. And maybe I'll give it 75 characters, and it's just text. Okay, so now if I was all done, I'll go ahead and save that. Now, if you'll notice, I'm not going to have anybody in there yet, but if I go to clients, if I go to look at the cabinets, there's the clients. I could obviously add a document here, but I'll have to create a new client because I don't have any yet. So if I go in here and I wanted to, here it is, clients, but notice I don't even have existing folder. That's because there are none yet. So the user in the first case, or the first time, is going to pick something here. Now I wanted you to notice something that's very interesting, and it's kind of leading into the CRM. But when you see a box that has a blue check mark by it, oh, there's existing. I'm sorry, it does show up down here. I made that the folder field. I apologize, but there's nobody in here, so I will have to create them. But I wanted to point out this checkbox. This checkbox is a way that, let's say you were doing some kind of hierarchy organizational thing, or you have a table. Let's say you have thousands of salespeople or whatever. Instead of having a drop down, you could have a table. And so in here I could go, hey, I've got to look up who that is. And I could say, let's look through, let's say vendors, and I want to look through the vendor's name. So I look at these and I go, yeah, that's Prairie Technology. So it's a way for me to link things. And when I link things, I don't have to type them in, but it means it wasn't a drop-down box. I made that a text field, but I'm just going to type in a number anyway. When I get to the client start date, there's my calendar. Here's the checkbox. Here's that field for the drop-down. And then my client name will be Acme. Okay, now, if I was putting a document into the system as a user, I could pick the subdivider I want. There they are. But here's that variable one, meaning that this one, for this client, I need something. And normally if I'm going to be using this more than once, I would do something. But maybe this is spouse information and or partner information. So I'm going to put partner info. Okay, so I put in partner info. Oops, got to select the folder first. I have to add that folder first. I'm sorry. So I've selected the folder now, but because it's new, I'm going to have to select from here. After I have at least one document or a subdivider built, I could start creating new ones. So right here, what I'm going to do now is select the document type. So right now for the document type, I'll pick public documents. Now I can fill in those fields. By the way, remember when I was doing this, I had those masks that I was typing in. There they are. Enter the 10-digit ID. I don't know if I typed in anything else. I might have on client name. No. So just that one I typed in. But that's what the text tooltip at the back does. Okay, so I could fill in my information. This one's required. So remember, anything you put with a required will show with a red asterisk. So I have to pick this, for whatever it is. And maybe I'll put in the date. Okay, so if I was all done, I would save that document. Oops, if I didn't put a document name. Let's see if I have any rules. If not, I'll just do it. Yeah, I'll just call it new doc. Okay, so that created a doc, although I didn't import anything. But the point is that now if I go back into the system and locate and browse folders under clients, I now are starting to accumulate some documents. Okay, so going back to cabinet types, you have the ability to build the folder fields so that if they being the user, use a screen like this and select clients now. Now I only have one client, but there's those fields. I could drill down to locate the proper client and then click on them to open up and start working with the documents. So we talked about security in the other class, but you might want to be aware of the personal and private folders that you have or can create. That's all based on security. But right now, what you're looking at then is that cabinet. So I've built a cabinet, but I don't have really any document types yet that maybe I want to use for my clients. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and build some document type, I should say. So, excuse me, to do that, I'm going to go back to admin. Once again, I could run a setup to create those, but I'm going to go right down to document types. Now on document types, I have the same thing. Let's say I want to kind of copy this invoice as a different type of document. In other words, save myself the hassle, and then I can always make changes to it. I could always copy it as a new document type name and then change it. I'm going to go ahead and hit add, and we're going to call this a client, maybe a client contract. Okay, oops. Okay, now I would start to type in my fields. This looks very similar to the same thing that we have when we talk about cabinet types, but there's an extra type of document field type, I should say, that you'll see in a moment. So let's call this, maybe this will be the, for the client contract, we'll have the execution date. Or let's put something in other than a date. Yeah, well, we can. Execution date. Okay, now do I want it required or not, and so forth. Visible is that security thing we talk about in security class, whether the user can see that field depending on if they are visible in their screen. I'll put down some characters, and I'm going to pick a field type here. There's an added field type called auto. If you use auto, then you can actually type in the starting number. You might even type in a starting format, like let's say this was going to be S16 in the new year, S16-0001, and then you can say increment by 1 or increment by 5, and then the next one would say you increment by 1. It would be S16-0002, 03, and so forth. So you can auto number fields as well. In this case, I'm going to pick a date field, and I'll just pick that same format. And let's put, witness. And maybe this will be a person's name, so I'll give it about 75 characters. And I'll just make that a text field. Okay, so that's all I'm going to have. I mean, I don't need a whole lot of information because I can search by the content of the document as well. Maybe this is some information that isn't on the document, and I want to capture that. Okay, so this is the document type. Now let's scroll down just a little bit here. Cabinet Relations is coming with the CRM, so you don't need to worry about that just yet. But over here, you can have another layer. So if you have for document types, maybe you want to create tabs like 2015, 2016. It is another way to selectively drill down or filter. Since I have to have one, it'll default to it all the time. I'm just going to call it all. So I have one in. Now, down here, you will notice that there is a retention table. If you've built some retention, and showing retention tables are very easy, and it's in the retention workflow class. But let's just say disabled for now, but I do want to explain that if I have some retentions that I've built in the table in the system, I could selectively choose that. If I select a retention date, then when documents go in that are this type, nobody, including the administrator, will be able to delete those documents until on or after that date. As an administrator, they can always go in and run an administrative report on documents that would give them the ability also to get a list, like a certificate of destruction, and then it'll ask the administrator, do you want me to purge those? So you don't have to go through the system looking throughout for all those. Workflow. If you have workflow built in the system, you could select what workflow, and that will go into the queue or into the user or users that it's their turn to do something with. It'll also send them an email contact as well. And as a supervisor, they could start to monitor and see that if it's running late and so forth. So you could create this workflow. Now I'm going to explain, variable name for a moment. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this screen once again and just kind of jump over and go under Admin, Setup, and under here I want to go to Variable Naming. Now, when a document comes into the system, like a document to this one right here, it will default to the name of the file that it was. If you want to set consistency or have the document rename, let's take an example. I can go in and build a variable name. Let's just call it global or let's call it for customer invoices. Maybe I want to do something special for those, or customer contracts, I'm sorry. That's what I was doing. No bearing on the name, except that it means, that it's kind of obvious what it is. Now, I could have it put in words, or a set of words, and I set the priority. So let's say I wanted to have the folder name. So if this is going into a folder Acme, the first part of the file name then will be Acme. Let's say I want to actually have some of the metadata fields from the document. Because remember, I'm creating metadata here called execution date and witness. I don't know if I really want that, but let's say since that's field 2, maybe for some reason over here I want that as the second field. So when a document comes in, it would be named whatever the client is, space, whatever that witness would be, or whatever's in field 2. I could put in other things even to say, maybe I want it to say at the end, executed CNT for contract. I don't know. Executed contract. And maybe that'll be field, I'm going to say 2 for a moment, because I wanted to explain something. If you put, not that this is a big deal, but just so you know, if you put the same number, then what it's going to do is these fields will be separated by an underscore. If I made this a 3, then it's going to separate it by a space. So in this case, it would, the actual name of the document when it comes in would be, Acme Company, say the witness was Bill Smith, space, executed contract. You might want to even put the date. You want to put in who filed it. If it was filed by a user versus the system automatically did it, I could put in the user. Maybe I even want to capture the date and time or something that they put it in. So I can do that as well and then save that. Now, when I save this, there's one of them. I could create as many as I want. I'm not going to see it on this screen because I brought this screen up prior to the time I had put it in. So I'd have to, in other words, start over. So I'm not going to worry about it right now. Over here, do you want to OCR any of the pages or not? I mean, if this is a photo that's coming in, you could say no OCR because it's not going to do any good. If they're really big documents and you go, the first 3 or 4 pages might have really everything you need from a search criteria, I could say for this type of document, I only want to OCR pages 1 to 10. Now, if the document's only 7, then the whole thing will be done. If it's 35 pages, the first 10 would be done. Okay? So if I were to save and exit that, I don't know if I forgot anything, but I'll know if I didn't. No, I didn't. So I've created a new document type as well, which means that if someone goes into the system and is putting in a document now, I'm going to just pick cabinet here and stuff. So if they went in and they said they're going to put in a client, and now they pick the existing client. Okay, here for document type. Document type, I'm going to pick that new one, client contract, and there's my fields, and that's the one I made required. And that would do it. Obviously I could actually do it now. Users can override, they can override too. If you say, hey, use something that we have in there, but now I have customer contracts. So if I save that document, then again, I just saved a blank page, nothing on it, but it could have been a document record entry. So what I just did was I just created a document type as well in the system. So if, again, I go back to Browse Folders and I look under Clients, Acme, I have 2 different subdividers, but here's that one new blank page I just put in just now as an example. Okay, and from before. So I could create document types. Remember when you're doing document types and cabinets to watch the security video if you haven't, because who has access to these document types? Okay, and again, we won't talk about it now. We covered that in security, but who, again, maybe I'll add that now so it has it built in. So who has security to this particular type of document as an example? Okay, so if you need help, you can always go to the manual. Once again, I could type in search And in this case, I'm going to shrink the screen down a little bit, I think. I'm going to type in cabinet. Oops. And when I do a search, I could say, here's managing cabinets, cabinets and folders. Here's using setup. That's using the wizard versus, you might be doing something a little different instead where you want to build it yourself, managing cabinets. And so in here, I could talk about how to build a cabinet. It talks about the fields, talks about copying. Colors of the screen were based on the user that was doing this, so don't worry that it's not blue like I'm showing. For document types, you have references as well. So setting up document types, it was part of it as well. So here, that was the wizard, I apologize. So recovering documents, creating stamps, creating and adding, managing naming conventions, that's what you noticed for the one part, setting up a document retention, which is part of the document. So all of this in here is good stuff if you need it as a reference as well. So at this point, we're going to open it up for any and all questions that you have. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about was that variable subdivider. The variable subdivider, if you remember when I was in cabinet types, and I think what I'm going to do here is just mute some lines just for a minute here, just to kind of keep the noise down, just for a moment if you don't mind. Let me just kind of pick on some of those. Okay, some of you are still open, but in any case. So what I want to do though is when I was doing cabinet types before, I was in here and I set up my cabinet types. So one of the things I had mentioned was right over here on the right side towards the bottom. On the right side towards the bottom there, what you'll notice is these variable folders I mentioned. Variable folders, for example, would simply be variable subdividers would be those subdividers that were created for a unique folder, for example. To show that, I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to go in and pretend I was going to add a document. So I'm going to go in and pick, I'll pick vendor and select a vendor. And now if I want to say I was going to, add the document at this point, I could say add a new file. And on this screen, one of the things that I could do is rather than, sorry, I noted a little pause there. Rather than having it determine the subdivider that I have here already, remember, those are my choices that I set up in the cabinet type as the default choices. But for whatever reason, ABC Company, we want to create maybe a dispute folder. Again, I'm making it up. I could obviously go back into my manage cabinet types and create another one that's called disputes so that I can use it more often. But maybe this one's going to have a dispute number. I don't know. I'm going to use that as the subdivider. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a subdivider and I'm going to call this dispute and I'm giving it a value just for the heck of it because it's very unique that way. Okay, so by creating that, I can selectively choose that one as this particular one. And let's say that I filed the document now. I will just go ahead and save this. So I put that in ABC Company. So the reason I wanted to show you that was because of the fact that now I'm going to go back in here under administration and under setup, cabinet types, and that was vendors, I think I did. Vendors. So notice that there are subdividers that are variable that are starting to be created. If you wanted to do cleanup or change the name, you can do that here, obviously. But what you will notice is if I go into, say, for example, I'm looking up vendors right now. And when I select vendors, ABC Company, you'll notice that there's even a new folder here, or this new value, I should say. So that's what variable subdividers can do for you and as for a user to create unique things. The other point I wanted to mention at least was I wanted to talk about how you put in or create folders. I talked about one way where on the fly I basically was ready to put a document in, and right at that moment when it was time to put a document in, I looked for an existing folder, didn't see one for that vendor or client or whatever, so I added them. The second choice I had was through here, and again, even though it shows under admin, if you allow users to add folders this way, they won't see all these other things, but when they go here, the only thing they would have is manage folders. So here they could go in and type in, vendor, for example, and create a new vendor, or maybe they're going to add a bunch of them. Another way is through ARI. When ARI files a named file, I'll leave it at that for now. The last way is, let's say you have an Excel spreadsheet, for example. So I'm just going to kind of drag this over. And so these are my people that, let's say that I exported or I have a list of, or whatever it happens to be. So what I can do is just drag and drop that into a folder that ARI is aware of. This will be discussed a little bit more in ARI, but I wanted to point out that this format right here behind me, I'm going to move it out of the way for a moment, but that format came from when I went into the cabinets in here. And I'll pick on clients again. That layout matches the same one. Now, when I save the file to this folder that I drag over and let it file, I have to make sure that the name of the file, like this wouldn't work. Clients1 wouldn't work. If I just had clients.xls, that would be fine. So in other words, when you save the file to a folder that's called folders on either your self-host or through the cloud, and again, I won't waste your time talking about that too much, but the point is that when you do that and you drag and drop, it will create or update, and that's where that whole unique thing comes in. So if I drag that over on my other screen to clients, let's see, I'm going to go into my clients now. Oops, I'm just going to go locating. So if I browse folders, I should say, clients, notice what I have. They all just loaded. I only had one before, but now I've got all of these. If I go in and look at the other way, folder details, and I bring up clients, you'll notice there they are. If you remember that spreadsheet, I just had all the same active date and things. So, we were picking from some of those. So I loaded a table with a whole bunch of things in there as an example that I have them listed and so forth. So I can also create or manufacture essentially from an ingestion of a document, of a file. I could have it create all of those particular entities or folders for me. Okay, with that, I wanted to show you something here that, if you wouldn't mind, I am going to, if I still have it, I think I do, maybe I don't, if not, I'll show it to you. Let's see. Yep, here it is. Right now, I'm going to send all of you just a quick link. And in this quick link, I am going to, where's my chat? There it is. Oops, I just put it away, sorry. I'm going to send this to everyone. It is a link for you to click on, and it should come up to this screen right here to take this quiz. So go ahead, and I'm just going to stop here for a minute and just give you a couple of minutes, but I thought let's go over the answers, because I mentioned this is kind of an important class, with cabinets and document types. So we'll take a quick pause here. Go ahead and take a couple minutes to take that test. Also, then, if anybody's taking this over the video when these do come out, you could just pause it here and then go to that website that's at the top, or use the location that is on the website. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this quiz and remember the questions if I can. So let's just kind of talk about these. The folder field in the cabinet screen, which one of these are true? Can only select one per cabinet field. In other words, on that screen that we have, when we're in the cabinet type, it's saying that we cannot have more than one folder field, if that's true, and that is true. This will display the name in that Folder Explorer screen. Remember, based on the field that I check. In other words, if I change this right now to facility or location, all of a sudden, if we go to the Explorer view, it's now going to be location rather than this one. So that one is true too. I can create files with array named rules that will use the folder field name to locate in file, and that's true. And then it is not true that you can leave that field blank. So in the response here, it just kind of shows you some of those. Okay. The user can create a new folder on the fly. That's true, because remember, when they're adding a document, if they were in adding a document right now, once they select the cabinet, if they've looked through the existing folder and they do not see that particular entity, whatever it happens to be, like if I pick vendors here just for a moment, I would look to see if they exist, but if they don't, I could go ahead and create them right here on the fly. Okay, so that is true. Okay, matching. Subdividers. Subdividers to me means, let's see, this means that no two folders can have the same field, or have this field the same. A set of standard separators. I'm going to definitely go with that. A set of standard separators, because in the cabinet file, or I apologize, in the cabinet type master, you can set up and add all of your standard subdividers right over here. That goes in here. Okay, with that, so that's true. Variable subdividers would be created by a user. I apologize for the typo. I actually did that this morning, but it's created by a user for a special folder. Okay, default subdivider. The subdivider that's selected unless the user changes it. So when I was doing that screen and I was putting in those subdividers here, I kept leaving this button checked so it became my last one. But once you've added the one you want, you could turn that off if you're continually adding some, and that will be the default for your choice. A unique field. This means no two folders can have this field the same. So that could eliminate duplication of creation, I should say, duplication and creation of matching files. Subdivider, remember subdividers, variable subdividers for specific folders can be added by users at time of entry. Creating document types does the following. Allows for security access to these documents, most definitely. Talked about in the security class, but most definitely. The fields created for the document can represent the type of document. Absolutely, that's part of the metadata. The metadata, to me, is what it means for that type of document. A field can be forced to be required, so the user must fill something into that field. That's true. A user can filter and search for specific types of documents. That's true. For example, if they're on the search screen, or many other screens, even on a folder screens, they could go in and say, I only want to search for, CDW documents, and then they can start filtering with date ranges and things. There is none in the system, but maybe there's employee applications. So they can use that as part of a filter. A user can export the metadata for other applications and analysis. Absolutely true. No matter what screen, when you have a group action, they can use the share button. And by using the share button, they could even extract the metadata, which would give you, in this case, 4 XML files. One would be one record, the second would be another record, the third would be another record, and the fourth would be a consolidated set of all of these. So I would say yes to all of those, and all of these are true and apply. A document metadata must be filled in by a user. True or false? Well, it doesn't have to be filled in, because first of all, if you don't make it required, but second of all, you can have the templates, which are part of ARI, file the documents for you and populate the metadata. So that's the response to the quizzes as well. I apologize, I literally made this test up just before this class, so I wanted to make sure I had something for us to review. But those are taken care of. Also, if you remember, going to document management training, going to self-paced, you will notice that I keep pushing these out as I finish them. This is the class that, when this is done, will be put right here. There is an exercise right here. There is this quiz that we just did. If you press this button, you will notice that there is a couple page document that will ask you or show you, here's log into a database, so you can log in and play. And then in here there are exercises, so you can look at the explanation. Here's some of the terminology of those, and then you could get into creating a cabinet. And so that's a play database. You could go in to create a cabinet if you didn't want to do things in yours. And then you can go on, and it shows you about adding a folder through manage folders, or by adding a single document. And then you could even create a new document type. So you could do the exercise here as well. And it talks about some of those things to you that'll be helpful. So some of these are starting to fill up, obviously. We've got a couple more weeks of classes that we're doing. So this will continue to build. I hope you continue to come, though, too, because watching the videos are great, but this is an opportunity to ask any questions. So again, I will just check real quick here if there are some questions. Oops, I turned it off, sorry. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I'm going to unmute your phones. Some of you have left the meeting already. Does anybody have any questions?